Bunuhan and Interchange, it was like Dane's original idea. The other one, Dukun, that's not screening here, that one was another producer called Dane, and she had this idea what she wanted to do about the shaman serial killer. And then Harum Malam, it was kind of like I said to him, let's do a horror. And I was quite fascinated by somebody I knew who does this kind of exorcisms, for lack of a better word, and has a son that had these sixth sense abilities. So I presented that idea to Dane, and he liked it, and then he took it from there, yeah, and made it what it is. But we wrote together as well. I think we started the writing process back in 2018, and then we, come up with the treatments and the story beats, and then draft after draft. And by the time we found the financing for the film, the final draft was written in like 2020, so 2 years later. There's so many taboos, so many layers, and we're a multi-ethnic and multi-religious country as well, so they're constantly mindful of not offending anybody, and there's all these social and moral guardians around. So with all our films, we do it like I always tell Dane, don't worry about it when you're working on the script or coming up with your story. We will deal with it when it comes to the time, so don't affect your creativity that much. It still affects choices we have to make, but so with the other films too, we are always not sure how it's going to come back, and so far we were okay. We got the 18 rating for our first two films, but this one they came back and they wanted to give us 13. And they said even with 18 they would still ask for quite a lot of the cuts, and so I had to go in and negotiate with them. And so they reduced the number of cuts. Some of them, they accepted my explanation and then didn't need to be censored. But it's a strange process for us in Malaysia because there's guidelines, but the actual film, it's based on that panel who's watching it on that day. I understand from talking with our new German friends here that similar things happen in Germany as well, right? So it's quite arbitrary for the filmmakers. So what we found was they were willing to let go and pass a lot of the very violent scenes, the gory stuff, a lot of the blood, but the things, they seem to have watched the film with that overly sexualized lens, and they took offense at a lot of that. And even though the way Dane tells his story, he hints at things, he alludes to things, because he's mindful of our cultural sensitivities. But this time, I think it's the content, actually. So I think something about the film kind of seemed to offend somebody very badly, and that's how it was. It was a very surreal experience for us, and yeah, it is what it is.
And I think, part of the problem is, I don't know how it is in terms of censorship anywhere else in the world or here, but the problem with censorship is always the process. Who is doing the censoring? And who for, or what for. And I think my problem with it really is that, as Nandita says, is arbitrary seemingly. But actually, it is because there is no real policy. There is no guidelines in black and white. What it is, so therefore things are always shifting. And I think the problem with that kind of thing is it always shifts for the benefit of authority, right? When things are not clear or there are gray areas, they don't want to make it clear and gray because it doesn't help them, because that means you can actually engage and have a discussion. What they want is essentially, no, it's this. And that's predicated on the idea that there's a policy, and it's usually moral, right? And so it's interpretive, right? And so it's who gets to interpret it and say, no, I think it shouldn't be like this, and therefore, to be able to do that, you must leave it open, right? Because then it's a question of they can then determine and dictate there and then what it should be. But the next time you have a different, because the bodies change, he could be doing so, he or she could say something else.
And something that we chose to do, so I was kind of stuck because our investors are like, no, try and get 13, You go in, you meet censorship, make sure you come back with 13. And then Dane's telling me, I don't want to cut the film. So we're very used to watching films in Malaysia in the cinema with mutes and blurs. instead of outright cuts. So Dane was very clear. He said, I want people to see, especially when things don't make sense, what, like the logic behind asking for certain things to be censored. So, like we had to mute certain words, but it's still there in the English and the Chinese subtitles. So, okay, they're fine with that, So it was kind of our statement that this is what they wanted, But then it turned out a bit weird in Malaysia, where the critics then kind of, without speaking to us, kind of then attacked the film for the mutes and blurs. Yeah, and we were like, but then would you have rather we just cut so you have no idea at all what it is? And Dane was very clear. He does not want the film to be touched at all. Like, keep that intact. So there's no cuts technically, but it is mangled with these mutes and blurs, and that's the result of going through the process of censorship in Malaysia.
A lot of the scenes was blurred, and it's not the scene is blurred. A particular thing was blurred, a particular thing, and sometimes suddenly there's mute, like that. I think that would be over-intellectualizing it for our audience and for the Malaysian cinema. We look at genre in that way.
Yeah, we do.
But most people don't.
Yeah.
Really.
And that's why we're very happy to be at a place like Hardline, where people appreciate genre for its subversive tendencies and its ability to talk about the things that are, more challenging.
Yeah.
And you place it within this, in this genre. Yeah. But at home, I'd say most of the horror films that are made are just kind of...
It's cookie cutter.
Most,
right?
not all. There are some directors who are trying to convey something else through their films, but not the majority. Yeah.
The thing is, we've moved on into film, which is, I think it's such a huge industry. And I think the narratives that's been building over the years or decades, I think we arrive at a point where the proliferation and fragmentation of different kinds of narratives is really there. But the thing is, for me, when and I think for Nandita as well, the way that things are set, it isn't just within your own culture and your own industry, whether here or Malaysia, but also vis-a-vis, if I'm from Southeast Asia, Malaysia, then there are expectations from the West, especially in certain film festivals, which are established, and they, I suppose, in my mind, expect certain, they have certain expectations for how a developing nation's film should be, and how that stylistic device or the aesthetics, should be. In the old days, it's what we call poverty porn. They expect only you to deal with the problems that European people or the West can consume, and then somehow appreciate our culture more. But I think more and more people, ourselves definitely, is like, no, I'm not interested in giving you poverty porn. I'm not interested in just showing you what the problems are in my society. There are other ways in which we can express those problems. And genre provides, I think, an amazing opportunity for us to discuss that, because it is precisely because it can, when it's bad, it can slip into what I call the cookie cutter, you know what I mean? But then you can take that very notion and that very idea and subvert it and play with it and break it and do all kinds of things with it, right? And that's what we, in many ways, I think, work towards in terms of genre, But at the same time, strangely enough, in our country, right, in Malaysia, they also have different problems in engaging with our films, because they expect the genre, if it's genre, to fulfill certain other expectations of what genre should be, of which they base it on what they learn from Hollywood or the West. And then the West looks at us and says, genre? Why are you doing genre? You should be doing, social realist or whatever, and telling us, art house, which I I know that there are also people, you know, in my country who do art house by numbers. You know, some countries, I'm not going to name names, they just take less is more. Certain things about anti-acting, a certain quietude, tick, 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 tick. And I just think that, you know, I'm not interested really. It's not that I don't appreciate it. I don't want to do that, yeah.
I'm interested in your question because it's funny, at home in Malaysia, we always get asked, oh, how do you make your film in such a way that it can appeal to an international audience? Because most Malaysian films do not travel, they're extremely local. So that's something we both share. It's like a thing that we don't think about. So when we start off writing, we're not really thinking, actually the last thing we're thinking about is what's an international audience going to respond to this. We're more interested in the themes that we want to explore in that story. And it's always important for us to bring our films back home and release it, to give it some kind of a commercial release, so that it doesn't just get pigeonholed into art house cinema. So that's the thing we're more concerned about always. Will a local audience be able to understand this? And I think we then make compromises that I don't know if they're necessarily the best things for the film, because we find ourselves sitting in this kind of uncomfortable place where it's not fully a mass Malaysian commercial for local audiences. And yet at the same time, I think because of our sensibilities, our aesthetics, our appreciation of world cinema, that that's all what you see in there. We make a lot of decisions together, like, you know, choosing who's the cinematographer and all these kind of things. So those all result in the end film that you see, you know. So yeah, we don't think about it so consciously, but along the way we do things like I'll share the scripts with our potential sales agents or sales reps way in advance of the film getting done, to at least know, like, okay, will this have some kind of a footing outside, which is important because I grew up and I spent so much of my time watching cinema from all over the world. So if now I'm involved in making a film, I really want as many people all over the world to watch it as well, you know? So it's not a mutually exclusive thing for me.
Yeah. So it's not like we plan anything, Michael. It's just it's intuitive, and we do it really. First of all, we need to satisfy ourselves, but at the end of the day, we don't want it to be so far out that really, at the end, I mean, I don't know how that works out. You know, it's not like we look at it and no, it's not. We just think, okay, this is how the story is. I think because we both educated, you know, also in a way in the West, but we also were educated in the, from where we come from, and education in a larger sense of the word, you know, culturally, not just going to school, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
And so like last night, after the screening of Interchange, a German woman came up to me and she was so visibly moved that she was quite emotional, and she had like tears in her eyes, maybe, I don't know. I was just like, wow, I can't believe that our story could touch somebody in that way here across cultural miles, you know?
And I'm reminded, actually, Michael, that now that she said it, I said, oh my God, yeah, when we released Interchange in Toronto and several other countries, always it's women that come up and say, I love the film, and they could see that, I could see that they're visibly emotional after seeing the film, yeah.